Good morning, or I should say noon. I'm Marty Powers, History of Art, and it's my pleasure today to introduce our guest speaker, Paul Copp, who is, in my view, has been very much expanding and complicating the field of religious studies in the China field. But first, a few announcements. I want to do the announcements first. Okay, so first, the next week's presentation in the CCS Noon Lecture Series will be given by Nicholas Hausen, our own University of Michigan professor of law in the Michigan Law School, who will be speaking on quack corporate governance as traditional Chinese medicine. That sounds good. Sounds like we have enough quack corporate governance in this country. It'll be interesting to see how they do it over there. Firm organization and the consequences of China's unreconstructed political economy. So don't miss it. Secondly, on the following Saturday, November 16th, the CCS documentary film series will present My Mother's Rhapsody, a 2011 film by director Qiu Zhongqiong, originally slated to be screened in the Yunfest Film Festival in Yunnan. The film is a journey into memory and visual metaphors as an 80-year-old mother and her adult son reminisce on the past. Sounds nice and sentimental. And of course, we would appreciate it if you would all take a minute to turn off your cell phones. I'll do that too. All right. Now, today's presentation is by Paul Copp, Associate Professor of Chinese Religion and Thought at the University of Chicago. He received his PhD from the Religion Department at Princeton University in 2005. He has taught, I imagine you worked with Buzzy there? Yeah, right. He has taught at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, just down the road, and has been a postdoctoral researcher at the Akademie der Wissenschaften in Heidelberg, and I'll let you guess what country that's in. Working on 5th and 6th century Buddhist stone inscriptions in Shandong, China. He is currently Associate Professor in Chinese Religion and Thought at the University of Chicago. His first book, The Body Incantatory Spells and the Ritual Imagination in Medieval Chinese Buddhism, is due out this spring from Columbia University Press. Very impressive. And his presentation today is part of a new book project, a paleographical and material historical study of the worlds of anonymous 9th and 10th century Chinese Buddhists whose practices, ritual and scribal, are evidenced by manuscript handbooks and liturgies discovered among the cache of materials in Dunhuang. So this strikes me as very new and exciting material that we're going to hear about today. It's tentatively titled Seal, Talisman, and Scroll, Vernacular Buddhism and Manuscript Culture in Late Medieval Dunhuang. And today's lecture is Magical and Religious Seals and the Sources of Chinese Buddhism. Please join me in welcoming Professor Copp.
Well, thank you very much for coming and for the really warm introduction. I kind of feel like I should have had a better title after that the other one, but can't. As Professor Powers says, this project, it's a part of, or it sort of grew out of this new book project I have looking at Dunhuang manuscripts, focusing on these texts that I'll talk about at the end of the talk, that are about how to make and use Buddhist talisman seals. And one of those I'll give you a short sense of later on. But as I was working on that, I just started asking myself the question, so why seals? I mean, why seals in Buddhism? Why are seals so important? And I just initially had intended to write a short, just quick here run through on seals. And now I have about 100+ page manuscript on seals, which I won't give you all of today. But anyway, this is from that. The importance of seals in Mahayana Buddhist practice and thought is clear in the metaphors they provided the religion, as it was carried eastward out of India, across Eurasia, and integrated into various local cultures. Such metaphors figure the nature of the Buddha's teachings and their mastery, seal of the law, seal of the Buddha, some of the deepest states of meditative attainment promised in the religion, samadhi of the ocean of seal impressions, and the postures taken by Buddhist deities and practitioners. Of course, the word mudra, which many of you may know, but you may not know, simply means seal. In the China of the 7th through the 10th centuries, an intensely formative period of the religion there, Buddhists adopted and reworked these images and added new examples of their own. Seals in Chinese Buddhism from this period were central to pictures of the nature of the intimate communication of truths from one mind to another, like the perfect impression of a stamp, and of the person transformed by those truths, as if she wore a seal of authority. Most famously, seals became guiding figures of practice in the Chan tradition, or the Zen tradition, where received metaphors of mind seal and seal of approval framed the ideal spiritual careers of monks, especially in their relationships with their teachers and with the traditional past. The awakened mind of the teacher, it was said, was like a seal recreating its image perfectly in the person of the disciple, a process in which seal impression becomes in turn seal matrix, repeated from generation to generation and constituting a key aspect of the tradition's self-understanding. Scriptures, too, could serve as seal matrices used to seal the minds of students. The Jingde record of the transmission of the light, a foundational text of the Chan tradition composed around the turn of the 11th century, speaks in just these terms when it reports that the influential Chan master Madzu states that he, quote, cites the words of the Lankavatara Sutra to seal the minds of living beings, unquote. Such seals of perfect understanding, it was said, could also be found naturally occurring in priests of native genius, such as the monk Yongja Shenjue, 665 to 713, author of the famous work Song of Actualizing the Way. Shenjue's late 10th century biography states that in him, quote, the mind source retained its aboriginal purity. In him, the complete text of the wisdom seal was present, unquote. Notable, too, in this period were images of mastery drawn from particular Chinese styles of the extremely widespread practice of wearing seals at the sash or the belt. The famed literatus and minister of the Tang state, Pei Xiu, dies in 846, in his preference to the Chan monk Huangbo's Essentials of the Transmission of Mind, praised Huangbo as being one, quote, who alone wore at his sash the seal of the highest vehicle that is apart from words, unquote. The omnipresence of such imagery in Buddhism is easy to understand. Seals had long been central to the practices of those civilizations, Indian and Chinese most prominently, in which Buddhism took on its most powerfully influential cultural forms. Indeed, beyond Buddhist Asia, seals had been in wide use for millennia, in cultures further upstream, as it were, from the seal cultures of Buddhist India and China, including those of ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean, all of which were marked at very early stages by many of the very same techniques and concepts found in the much later behaviors of Chinese Buddhists. Seals, in fact, and the scholar of ancient Mesopotamia, Elena Kassan, has called them simple facts of civilization, were crucial elements in a range of early cultures, techniques for ensuring privacy in written communication, markers of good faith in political and trade relations, emblems of institutional and divine identities, and from an early stage, tokens worn on the body or employed in ritual as talismans. Seals were worn suspended on cords as amulets and as social markers in civilizations as disparate as those of the ancient Near East, Minoa, the Greco-Roman world, India, and of course, China. Corresponding continuities in the use of seals as metaphors across an astonishingly vast landscape of culture and geography are striking. As the scholar of medieval European seals, Brigitte Bedos-Rezac notes, quote, Mesopotamian and biblical texts, Platonic and Aristotelian treatises, patristic and early medieval commentaries all incorporate sealing imagery as a conceptual tool. Seals were especially prominent in these contexts, once again, in images of the relationship between teacher and student, and of the human apprehension and embodiment of truth. Sealing an impression into a person in such images is a figure of the reformation of the person in the image of the seal, where the seal matrix stands for the prototype, the original, whether God in Christian examples or in Buddhist cases, the Buddha, or a living master understood as Buddha, and the truth that he awakened to. Beddoes-Rezac, to just give one example, quotes the Cistercian Abbé Gilbert de Walland, dies in 1172, who says, quote, "Imprint yourself to him, that is God, so that his image may be expressed in you. Make yourself conform to his seal." Now, in physical practices of ritual sealing, which is mainly my concern here, of course, it is first of all clear that the spiritual efficacies claimed for talismanic ritual practices derived from the normal social logics and metaphors of seals. The protection said to be offered those dwelling behind a door, sealed against demonic intrusion, for example, was a simple extension into the spiritual realm of the protection offered by personal sigils to the contents of envelopes or containers of trade goods. A seal's social power is, after all, always in part spiritual. As Verity Platt notes in her study of Greco-Roman seal stones, quote, "A seal's impression establishes a set of moral obligations which bind those who encounter it. To break or forge a seal is an act which everybody knows is wrong," unquote. The form of social magic most widespread in medieval Chinese religious seal practice was that of identity. The metonymy in play, for example, when a seal was understood to represent the person of the monarch stamped on his documents or carried by his officials. In extending the power of the throne to the object bearing it, the impression left by a royal sigil transformed what it marked with the authority and presence of the state. The official bearing the seal matrix also bore with him that authority, the aegis of which defined his own social and spiritual identity. He was in this way both subsumed within the state's protective aura and himself the grantor and keeper of that protection. The semiotic logic, at play in such behaviors like that of the sealing of packages was central to a range of ritual seal practices in medieval Chinese religion, including those of Buddhism. We find seal matrices inscribed with the names and images of gods and Buddhas that made physically present the powers and principalities to which they were dedicated, both in their material forms of cast bronze or carved wood, and in the presence of those who use them, in the persons of those who use them, whether they were trained ritual specialists employing wooden seals that they themselves had carved, or lay people wearing sigils purchased at shrines as charms against the dangers of the road. In terms of the more rarefied seal metaphors sampled above, the extension of identity is seen in the notion of the seal of the Buddha, where the spiritual identity of the Buddha described in Mahayana texts, that is, the fact that he is awake to the emptiness and equality of all things, and by extension the very facts of emptiness and equality are sealed, as it were, into phenomena. Now, by at least the turn of the 8th century, stamp seals had become prominent tools in Chinese Buddhist ritual practice. Though Buddhists in China had begun to use seals in rites of exorcism and various forms of spiritual enhancement at least 300 years earlier, when the first scriptural evidence for their practices appears in the transmitted record, it is only in the early 700s that stamps appear in iconography in the hands of bodhisattvas and as normal instruments of ritual practice in the accounts and ritual manuals of major Buddhist writers such as the Huayan exegete Li Tongshen. Before the 700s, ritual seal techniques had mainly been practiced and elaborated within relatively obscure rituals centering on spells and incantations, techniques that led to the production of native scriptures such as the consecration scripture. But with the rise in cultural status of incantation practice in Chinese Buddhism, seals began to appear around the year 700, much more prominently in the material record. In the material and visual components of the religion. For example, as ritual tools born in the hands of sculpted and painted bodhisattvas, most often of Guanyin, in one of his new guises associated with incantatory traditions, especially his 11-headed and his 1,000-armed versions. The earliest known datable example is a relief sculpture of a 2-armed and 11-headed bodhisattva adorning the Qibaotai, or the Tower of Seven Treasures, in the Guangjai Si of Chang'an, or modern Xi'an, of course, which was commissioned around the year 703 by the female emperor Wu Zetian. What do you have there? The popularity of seal-bearing bodhisattvas in Chinese Buddhist visual culture through at least the Song period appears to have been significant in areas ranging at least from the imperial capital to Dunhuang in the northwest and the Sichuan region in the southwest. Other surviving Tang sculpted examples include a small, 9.3 centimeters, gilt copper alloy votive statue in the collection of the Art Institute of Chicago of an 11-headed and 6-armed Guanyin who bears in his middle right hand a stamp seal. Sorry if it's a bit blurry. Painted icons of seal-bearing bodhisattvas from the Tang and the 10th century include at least 4 portable silk paintings of Guanyin grasping seals bearing swastikas, an image of blessings that, as we will see, is from a certain perspective the oldest and most important of all ritual seal emblems. These paintings were among the hoard of documents and images discovered in Mogao Cave 17, near the city of Dunhuang, the ancient site of caravanserais along the overland Eurasian trade routes, commonly known today, of course, as the Silk Roads, running from Constantinople through Chang'an and beyond. Perhaps the most striking image of all, and possibly the earliest of the extant painted images, is the mural of a 1,000-armed Guanyin found in Mogao Cave 148, which the cave is dated as a whole to the year 776. The bodhisattva holds in one of its most prominent and forward-positioned hands a seal inscribed with what appears to be a stylized swastika. Let me know what you think. As with so many features of Buddhist practices in China, the religion's seal techniques can be traced to multiple historical sources, to the objects and styles of Indian and Central Asian practice, as well as to those of non-Buddhist China, where seals had been parts of distinctive techniques and conceptions for many centuries before they appeared in Buddhist practices there. As I said, seals were in fairly wide use in China, in Chinese culture, dating back to at least the Warring States period, that is roughly 475 BC to 221 BC, worn on the body or used to stamp clay bullas or fengni, talk about those in a minute, or paper and silk documents and paintings. Seals were integral to a wide range of cultural practices, most prominently those of politics and commerce, but also those of romance and friendship, of connoisseurship and literati style, of Confucian ethical paths, and most importantly, for the purposes of this talk, a great variety of ways of healing, exorcism, protection, and the conferral of blessings. In the remainder of this talk, I will explore elements of the broad history of religious seal practice that appear to have either directly shaped or provided cultural resources for the techniques evidenced in Chinese Buddhism. In Chinese Buddhism, I should say. The period surveyed ends with the 8th through the 10th centuries, a time, as I said, of great transformation and creativity in the wider Chinese culture of seal use, not only within Buddhism, but also within the practices of the literati and within the Taoist religion, whereby at least the Song, beginning in the year 960, the far end of this period of transformation, seals, long parts of Chinese religious practice, were undergoing much more systematic absorption within the ritual modalities of that religion. Tang and 10th century Buddhist seals appear, in fact, to have been integral parts of this transformation. Buddhist practice in China was, in this way, an agent in the wider cultural transformations in which it was itself transformed. Excavated and transmitted sources alike speak to the importance of seals in India throughout its historical period. From around the 2nd century BCE, for example, excavated Malava seals dating to that era, through the period treated in this talk and beyond. This history, indeed, was an important source for the Chinese Buddhist history that I focus on today. As elsewhere in the ancient world, seals in India served as signatures and as marks of quality and authenticity, employed not only to guarantee the objects they marked, but also to keep them safe from prying eyes. More importantly for my purposes here, seals were widespread as tools of religious life in India, including in Buddhism, and many of the practices found in China were also found there, sometimes in strikingly similar forms. Seals served as official emblems of monastic institutions, pilgrimage mementos, signs of membership, amulets, and votive offerings. One scholar has in fact asserted that the religious inspiration for Indian seals is even more evident than it is in ancient Babylonian seals, where it has often been remarked. Through the study of seals, scholars of India have traced the histories of various Indian religious traditions, including those of Puranic Hinduism, Mahayana Buddhism, and Mahayana Buddhism. For reasons of time, however, and because the Chinese material is so rich, and I want to try to give as much of it as I can here, I will, with one important exception later on, skip over the Indic material. I do hope to publish all this material soon in actually 2 long articles now, and those of you who are interested can examine the Indic evidence there. But let me repeat that many of the seal uses found in Indian religious contexts are also found in Chinese Buddhism. In many cases, the Indian and Central Asian monks who traveled to China over the trade and pilgrimage routes no doubt brought their seal techniques and their seals themselves with them. Such practices, with their clear Indic provenance, would likely have been treated as canonical parts of the religion, along with the scriptures and doctrines that accompanied them. Chinese Buddhists, however, did not only learn their seal methods from foreign monks. Though given simple facts of chronology and basic resemblance, it may originally have derived from techniques and objects imported from the West in prehistory. By the early medieval period, China had its own old and deep culture of seal techniques from which Chinese Buddhists could draw in fashioning the seals and seal rites evidenced in their scriptures, ritual manuals, iconography, and institutional practices. Scholars customarily point to the Warring States era again, after the central royal power of the Zhou dynasty had been drastically weakened, and a new landscape of contending and often warring states had arisen as the age when seal practices proper first arose within Chinese culture. Seals in early China, consisting of inscribed main bodies and handles of various shapes, were typically made out of bronze or sometimes jade, though examples of clay, horn, wood, and wood dating to the Han have also been discovered. Typically, and as we have seen reflecting a practice common across the ancient world, a hole was made in the handle so that the seal could be worn as an emblem of office and rank or as an amulet. The simple wearing of seals, again, constituted one of their chief uses in this and in later periods of Chinese history, marking as well early China's participation in this broad trans-Asian culture of seal use. Seal impressions in the early period were stamped on clay, affixed to containers of bamboo or wooden documents to ensure their privacy and authenticity. These sealing clays, or bullas, or fengni in Chinese, constitute some of the most important evidence for seal practices in early China. And as I will explain later, just as the practice of wearing seals was carried over into religious behavior, clay bullas made from seals bearing the names or images of divinities were also adopted into religious practices, often as talismanic weapons employed against demonic spirits. Again, all the standard practices involving seals were adapted for use in religious practices. In all cases, as far as I can tell, the ritual uses of seals grew out of and extended the normal social logics of seals. Personal seals, that is, seals inscribed with their bearers' names, whether their family name, their personal name, or, especially, of course, in later periods, one of the various forms of cognomen used in elite Chinese culture, as opposed to seals associated with and naming particular institutions or royal titles, have been discovered in great numbers, mainly in tombs, and appear to have been commonly possessed, beginning again, at least in the Warring States period, then falling off to a large extent after the Han. This is at least based on tomb evidence. Until around the Tang period, when the practice appears once again to have grown in popularity. Many of these seals were very simple in design, bearing only the names of their owners, and appear to have had little in their characters that marked them as implements of religious practice, though the fact that many have been found in tombs makes this an open question, at this point at least. Others were adorned with potent, auspicious images that, in addition to their aesthetic value, may indeed have been considered apotropaic elements and or spiritual enhancements of various kinds, such as the spirit creatures of the four directions and animals such as cranes that were often associated with transcendence and with spirits. We find seals dating to the Qin period, such as one apparently borne by a certain Zhao Duo, who on which images of the spirits of the four directions are carved. You don't see it there, sorry. Such that they surround the seal bearer's name. Seals inscribed with phrases of auspicious or ethical import were also at times paired their texts with such images. For example, an apparently talismanic Han seal, on which the phrase daily benefit or Li is juxtaposed with the image of a bird that one scholar has identified as a transcendence crane, suggesting he thinks the bearer's wish for a prosperous and long life. Handles were another location for imagery on personal seals. They often took the forms of the potent mythological creatures mentioned here, and are, for this reason, sometimes called exorcistic knobs, or bixianyo, in the scholarly literature. A striking example is a bronze seal, one on your right there, discovered in a so-called boat-shaped coffin in Sichuan, dating to the late Qin or the early Han period, that combines a few of the elements of amuletic personal seals mentioned here. On its face, on the top there, it centers the graph, or probably the name, Wang, flanked by two stylized dancing animal or spirit figures, and its handle is a fully realized rhinoceros. As I said, the use of personal seals appears to have declined sharply during the period stretching from the Wei through the northern dynasties, that is, around 220 to 589. An age, however, that saw key developments in the religious seal practices of a range of traditions, as I will talk about in a little while. Personal seals became popular once again during the Tang, starts in 618, of course, which all scholars of the subject have identified as a crucial turning point in Chinese seal culture, witnessing both a renaissance of seal techniques and forms that had fallen into disuse during the preceding centuries, and also the appearance of new styles, some of which would become standard in the later imperial period and today. The Tang saw the initial appearance of the so-called huaya, or flourish, or signature seal, for example, with which literati signed or otherwise marked their correspondence and documents with highly stylized calligraphic images. This is one that combines a bunch of things, as I'll say in a minute, but we have a huaya mark on the bottom, on its bottom. Huaya seals became especially popular during the Song and Yuan periods, roughly 960 to 1368. Related to these new seals was the reappearance in great numbers of older forms of personal seals bearing the family names or cognomen of the literati who carried them, often, especially in later centuries, in new and various shapes such as gourds, turtles, and at times Buddhist imagery. Seals in these practices were, like their Greco-Roman counterparts, powerful metaphors for the individual and his or her engagement with the world. Just briefly, this one combines a bunch of things. Buddhist sort of flaming mani jewel on the top, daji, right, or great luck, good luck in the bottom, in the middle, etc. Many early Chinese seals contain only images, often of a seemingly auspicious or talismanic character. In many cases, these appear to have been worn as amulets, though given the absence of any textual components and the fact that most were simply found in tombs, their uses among the living are difficult to determine with any precision. At minimum, we can observe that, like other kinds of seals, many had holes drilled into their handles, such that they could have been worn, and indeed suggesting that they had been made for that purpose. given the nature of the images they bear and their resemblances to the accounts of mythological in mythological and religious texts, as well as their connections with the wider culture of seal use surveyed in this talk, it seems fair to conclude that many such seals were used as amulets and as exorcistic tokens. Indeed, judging by both archaeological and transmitted evidence, auspicious or exorcistic image seal amulets and tokens were made and worn in great numbers in China already by the Warring States period and through Han times. Like other personal seals, many fewer examples of these have been found in tombs or archaeological strata dating to the early medieval period. And then this, again, picks up in the Sui and the Tang dynasty. It's the same pattern throughout all this evidence. Again, like all other forms of seal, anyway, repeating myself here. The amuletic and or exorcistic character of other seals, though still uncertain given the lack of clear contextual evidence, is much more strongly suggested by the nature of the images they bear. Back to this one. The two seals in the center here have been somewhat controversially, I think, but still interestingly identified as depicting the ritual masters known as Fangxiangshi, who are said to have worn bear masks in some cases, and others to have posed with shields upraised and blades drawn. The seal and impression to your left, yes, has been identified, again, not uncontroversially, as depicting a tiger menacing a demon. Scholars drawing on accounts in the 6th century commentary on the history of the later Han dynasty note that tigers, being creatures strongly yang in character traditionally, were natural predators of demons. The seal thus may have been thought to afford protection from demons, whether worn or impressions stamped on doorways, and stamping such images on doorways is a practice that's attested in this commentary on the text. Among the most striking image seals from the archaeological record are a number of examples bearing swastikas, an image that, as I have already said, is present on Dunhuang iconography and elsewhere. You can go see it over in Chicago. The earliest known swastika seal from China is a very small bronze stamp, which I couldn't get a picture that was clear enough to put up there, I'm sorry. 1 centimeter on each side, held today in the collection of the Palace Museum in Beijing, which one scholar has dated to the 2nd century CE, largely based on what he takes to be the TLV-like designs surrounding the swastika. Given the lack of archaeological context, it is impossible to know how that small stamp was used or by whom. Yet that the scholar suggests that it was derived from Buddhist scriptures, which were beginning to arrive in China in the period to which he dates the stamp, though the only example he can cite is the Shikshananda version of the Avatamsaka Sutra, which dates to the year 700 AD, which is, of course, 500 years after the seal was made by his own account. Personally, I think it's highly unlikely that the seal derived from translated Buddhist scriptures. In fact, though the swastika was indeed at times a Buddhist image, I'll talk about that, there is no reason to think that this particular seal derives from Buddhism at all. We might look instead to the spread of seals bearing this image from India through Central Asia and into China. As noted earlier, from a certain perspective, swastika seals were among the oldest and longest lived of all seals, with a history that stretched in China back at least to the 2nd century AD, and in South Asia all the way back to ancient seals discovered in the Indus Valley, which in some cases appear to date from the late 4th millennium BC. Though the full histories of their use are at this time impossible to trace, we can note a number of examples that are suggestive of the life of these seals as their use spread eastward across Asia into medieval China. The material record contains coins and tokens from South Asia, with the image dating to the last few centuries before the Common Era. Several excavated seals dating from the 2nd through the 4th century CE from Yotkan and other regions of Central Asia, where strong Chinese cultural, military, and merchant presence had extended westward through Dunhuang. A conical bulla from the Bactrian Gandharan region dating to the period stretching from the 4th through the 8th century CE, as well as a number of painted depictions of such seals at Dunhuang itself, which, as I just said, are firmly Buddhist in character and date to the 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries. The South Asian examples include seals and coins or tokens bearing the image, in some cases simply as one beneficent image among others. This square North Indian copper alloy coin token dated to the coin or token dated to the 3rd century BCE bears, along with the swastika, images on both sides that include an elephant, the sun and moon, and a cross-shaped symbol, among others. And here I'm simply following the British Museum's description. Examples from Yotkan include a bronze seal, 2.9 centimeters on a side, that, like the Indian coin, bears 4 images on its face: 3 and 4 leafed designs, a diagonal cross, and a swastika. It has been dated by the British Museum to the 1st through the 4th centuries CE. Also from the British Museum collection are at least 3 other Khotanese seals bearing the symbol, including this example, which may be a button or a token rather than a seal, 1.4 centimeters in diameter, made of bone. Though the Han-era swastika stamp I mentioned a moment ago was unlikely to have had any direct Buddhist connections, it is clear that by the Tang, the symbol was indeed closely associated with Buddhism, often as a marker of the Buddha himself. Taking again the example of the Shikshananda Huayanjing or Avatamsaka Sutra, a passage describing the attributes of the body of the Buddha relates that the circular, quoting here, the circular mark of the swastika, one of the adornments of the Buddha, emits such great radiance that it illuminates the entirety of reality, unquote. Elsewhere, the text notes, quote, the swastika character is the name for oceanic clouds of blessings, unquote. The Song Dynasty period Dictionary of Sanskrit Buddhist Terminology, the Glossary of Sanskrit Translation, claiming to quote from a lost text called The Sound and Sense of the Avatamsaka, describes the mark as, quote, a concentration of blessings and the myriad virtues, unquote. The use of the swastika on seals in late medieval China is, as noted, attested by images of such seals, again, in the hands of icons of the Bodhisattva Guanyin, dating to the period stretching from the 8th through the 10th century. At least 4 painted silk icons of the 1,000-armed Guanyin from Dunhuang bear the stamps. For example, this one called Stein Painting number 167. Beyond the Buddhism of middle period China, and beyond the range of the survey, swastika seals also achieved popularity in the religious practices of another tradition in China. Seals featuring the image, often at the center of a cross, were used in Christian practice during the Yuan period of Mongol rule, that is 1271 to 1368. Now, returning to seals with words inscribed on them, one group, drawing on the representational of logic inherent in the use of royal seals, bears the names of deities or the titles of the ritualists who invoked them. The monarchs represented in these practices were cosmic principalities, deities, and heavenly sovereigns. Tombs of the 1st century CE contain small bronze seals whose inscriptions point directly to their bearers' roles as agents of deities. We find inscriptions on the seals such as Yellow Spirit, Seal of the Yellow Spirit, Seal of the Heavenly Thearch, or Seal of the Emissary of the Yellow Spirit, and Spiritual Master of the Heavenly Thearch, among others that reflect the ancient civil and cosmic function of imperial seals. Aside from naming the titles of their bearers and the deities for whom the seal bearers acted as agents, some early religious seals also named the particular rites for which they were crafted. In general, those that summoned and commanded spirits for the ritualist's own uses, or to expel or kill them in exorcistic rites. These examples include seals marked, one, quote, High Lord of the August Heavens, seal for the control of myriad spirits, unquote, and another, the Heavenly Thearch's demon-killing seal, unquote. Now, seals bearing the phrase Huangshan Yue Zhang, or conquering emblem of the yellow spirits, are among the oldest and most storied of all Chinese ritual seals. The name invokes the renowned exorcistic might of the yellow spirit, an early version of the figure later better known, of course, as the Yellow Thearch or the Yellow Emperor, whose association in early China with a range of demonophugic or anti-demon, demon-killing techniques is widely evidenced. Seals with this name figure prominently in Gehong's Baopuzi, or the master who embraces simplicity, and are singled out as well in the Buddhist monk Xuanguang's 5th century excoriation of early Taoist practice called On Delusions. A tale of the potencies of the seal, furthermore, is contained in Du Guangting's 10th century collection of Taoist tales, records of the proven efficacies of Taoism. The seal remained an important ritual implement in Taoist canons beyond the Song period, a fact made clear by the place of the seal in the great ritual collection titled the Daofa Huiyuan. The history of the seal, in fact, is emblematic of the wider history of ritualist seals in China, which, in a group possibly including some of the early image seals mentioned earlier, began as tools of Han-era spirit mediums and other occult masters, and, over time, were borrowed by Buddhist and Taoist ritualists, and ultimately systematized within later Taoist and Buddhist traditions. Among the earliest actual examples of the seal is a Han period stamp inscribed on 2 sides that you see before you here. Aside from Huangshan Yuezhang on its sealing face, it bears on its back a longer inscription, now largely illegible, which, following certain scholars' reading of it, clearly marks the object as an anti-demonic agent. The phrase Shagui Zhi'in, or demon-killing seal, is among the few readable portions remaining. Gehong's account of the seal of the conquering emblem of the yellow spirit is part of his answer to the question, quote, "Those who practice the way are often in mountains and forests. In mountains and forests they are often attacked by tigers. What should they do?" Gehong's answer is the conquering seal of the yellow spirit, which he directs his readers to use to make sealed clay bullas, such as those noted earlier, just for reference here, and place them around one's camp, 100 places out at the 4 cardinal directions. Neither tigers nor wolves, he says, will dare approach you. When on the road, wear the seal for similar protection. If you encounter fresh tiger tracks, then seal them with the seal, pointing the seal impression in the direction you want the tiger to go. He also tells a tale of the use of these yellow spirit bullas that came in later centuries to be adopted into Buddhist lore. And this is Gehong's account. A turtle demon lived in a pond from which he spread disease among the local populace. A traveling Taoist passing through the region makes a few hundred yellow spirit bullas, rows out into the pond, drops them into the pond like depth charges, and then soon enough the demon just floats to the surface, dead, and everybody is cured. Another tale of the seal's potency dates to the 10th century. A certain Zhang Rang was out traveling when he was struck down by a strange illness of the heart-mind. He first becomes forgetful and starts to get lost easily, but after a few months, things get much worse. He starts running around naked, completely heedless of danger, and in fact, injuring himself several times. To his rescue comes a Taoist priest named Yang Guizhen, wielding his newly carved yellow spirit seal. Yuan takes his seal and stamps Zhang on his heart and back. Zhang reacts violently to this and tries to run away, but Yuan grabs him and seals him one more time. And then Zhang falls asleep. At this point, the tale reports, Yuan becomes confident of the potency of his new seal. Employing cinnabar and burning incense, Yuan seals Zhang one more time on his heart, which brings about his patient's full healing. A bird-like creature climbs out of Zhang's mouth, where it is revealed to be a great bat, upon whose back the impression of Yuan's seal is very clear in red. Zhang Rang makes a full recovery, and we are told that Yang Guizhen goes around healing many others with his brand new powerful seal. So now, returning full circle to Chinese Buddhism, these kinds of ritualist seals had clear counterparts in forms of the religion, evidenced and on manuscripts from Dunhuang. 4 manuscripts, now held in the Pelliot collection at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, contain versions of a manual not found in transmitted literature for the making and use of Buddhist talisman seals. That is, again, seals inscribed with Chinese talismanic writing. Sort of see it there. That invoke, in this case, the Bodhisattva Guanshi Ruilun, or the Guanyin of the wish-fulfilling jewel and wheel, a form of the Bodhisattva popular in Western China in the late Tang and 10th century. taken as wholes. The 4 manuscripts, you see only 2 of them here, sorry, seem to have been handbooks composed and used by practitioners of a local style of Buddhist ritual practice, strongly shaped throughout, not only by Buddhist incantatory arts, but also by native Chinese forms of the sort explored in this talk. The seal manual in particular appears to offer instructions for the manufacture of instruments for the practices of Buddhist ritualists, steeped in the same family of techniques employed by Taoists such as Yang Guizhen and his Huangshan Yuezhang seal. But instead of embodying the powers of the Chinese yellow spirit, they invoked Buddhist spirits such as Guanyin, Manibhadra, the Buddha himself, Buddhist spiritual states such as Samadhi, or spiritual and talismanic emblems of the religion such as the lotus. I don't have time, of course, to give more than the most brief sketch of this material, but as I said, writing a book about it. Hope to get back to you later on that. The description, I'll give you one though. The description of the Padma or lotus seal, this is from Paleo-Xinhua 3835, gives a representative account of the making and use of a seal from the manuals. As with the other seal accounts, it is framed as the words of the Bodhisattva Guanyin spoken to the Buddha. And here they are. Quote, "World-honored one," that is the Buddha, "this seal is the Padma seal. It has great spiritual power. Carve the seal from white sandalwood, and if you seal the body with it, the body will immediately glow with great radiance, and the great earth will move with the 6 kinds of earthquakes. If you take the seal and seal the great earth, the earth will transform into gold and jade. Wherever you stand, if you take the seal and shine it upon the 4 quarters, all will be made jewel-like. If someone desires to see me, that is to have a vision, use the seal to seal his eyes. He will immediately see my true body. If one desires to see the pure lands of the 10 directions all together before one's eyes, one must only be pure and not chaotic in one's body and mind. If one is chaotic in one's body and mind, then there's no hope, but you just have to call out to the Buddha. The seal's not going to work for you." At least 3 of the characteristic elements of religious seal use in medieval China are present in this account. The use of special woods chosen for their particular efficacies in ritual and medicine, the association of the seal with a deity, here the Bodhisattva Guanyin, and the ritual gesture of shining or pointing the seal as a way of directing its potencies, reflecting the practices one finds in ritual mirrors. Such continuities with traditional accounts of native Chinese sealing rites, and they include wider connections with native claims about spells and amulets, offer especially vivid evidence, both because of their extended and explicit nature, and for the simple fact that they are found in excavated sources of the place of Buddhist seals within the much broader Chinese culture of religious practices that I have tried to outline for you today. And thank you very much for listening.